On this theme of worship, we got a call from Daniel on 1 Corinthians chapter 14. You know, in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, the Apostle Paul says, in the context of worship, everything needs to be done decently and in order. And Daniel wants to ask a question about this chapter in particular. Let's listen in.
Hello there. My name is Daniel from Kansas City, Missouri area. My question relates to the end of 1 Corinthians 14, where it says, let him who is spiritual acknowledge that what I'm writing to you is a command of the Lord. Whoever ignores this himself will be ignored. I'm wondering what you see that is actually the command of the Lord in the instruction preceding that clarification from Paul. So if you would expand on what is actually being commanded, I would appreciate it. Thank you. Bye.
Sure. What's his name?
Daniel.
Sure, Daniel. It's a really important and I think often misunderstood passage. First of all, you kind of have to back up a little bit and say, who are the Corinthians? What is this disciplinary letter all about? It is a disciplinary letter. Paul is pretty upset with the way the church is running in Corinth. You have a very wealthy church, a church in a very wealthy city. It's a very worldly city, and Christians are living like the world. And they're even, they're suing each other. They are broken up into factions and divisions, rivalries, envy, slander. They are engaging in sexual immorality. They basically are living like pagans, and then they come to church on Sunday and they get all washed up and think, nothing's wrong. Paul says, this is so bad you need to suspend communion. Suspend the Lord's Supper until things are improved in Corinth. This is like the Wild West here. And one of the ways it's like the Wild West is the disorderly worship. The selfishness is palpable. And so Paul has been saying, clearly what the Corinthians were saying is we're spiritual. We're so spiritual. Part of the problem was you had this group that was saying, we are more spiritual than the other people in the church. We speak in tongues, we prophesy, we heal. We are more spiritual than other Christians. And Paul is saying here in 1 Corinthians 14, after the love chapter in 1 Corinthians 13, really, you're spiritual, are you? Then why do you act like children? You act like selfish babies. You're showing off what you think are spiritual gifts, but you don't even understand what those gifts are. And you're not using them to build up the body or proclaim the gospel to outsiders. Your worship is shallow, disorderly, and full of confusion. It's more like American Idol than the worship of God. And this is exactly what he says. Be not children in your thinking. What then, brothers, when you come together, each one has a hymn, a lesson, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. Let all things be done for building up. For God is not a God of confusion, but of peace. What will happen, he says, if people are speaking in unknown languages in the church and an unbeliever comes in? He says, will they not say that you're out of your minds? Let everything be done in order and decency. If you're speaking in a language that other people don't know, then let there be an interpretation. In other words, there is no bypassing of the mind. The proclamation of Christ needs to be rational and articulate. It needs to connect with people who are actually there. It needs to build up the body, and it needs to bring conviction to those who are visiting, who don't know the Lord.
And this really gets at, with the previous question, one of the points that you were making about the importance of worship being something according to being done according to God's. It's not just that God cares that he is worshipped, but he actually cares about how he's worshipped. And that's what we're seeing all over the place in 1 Corinthians 14.
That's right. When he says orderly worship, he doesn't just mean have a bulletin.
Yeah.
He means make sure that everything that you do, you do only what the Scriptures require. Look, you can do all kinds of things. That Christians are free to go to football games on Monday or Saturday. Christians are free to go hang out with whomever. Christians are free to do lots of things. On the Lord's Day, the churches are to do only what God has required, and that actually is freedom. Freeing the rest of us from the pastor's creativity, or from the pastor's legalism, or from the pastor's opinions. Only God gets to have the first, middle, and final word in this service. The ministers are only ambassadors. Ambassadors do not make policy. Ambassadors communicate policy. And boy, do we need to get that straight today. Pastors or worship teams, whatever do not determine what we do in worship, but communicate the terms of God's peace treaty that He has declared in His Word.
Yeah, Daniel, so I think in summary, as we think about this passage, what exactly is Paul saying is the command of the Lord? Well, he's saying, look, you guys are doing all these prophesying, all these different things in your service. It's done out of order. It's not done in accordance with God's Word. I want you to know I'm speaking as an ambassador of Christ, as a representative of God. And what I'm saying to you is a commandment of the Lord, that this is what worship is supposed to look like.
Yeah.
And He's binding them to that.
And let me just get specific here, Daniel. When you have movements that proclaim to be so spiritual because it's a laughing revival, or it's people
Barking like dogs.
barking
I've
like
heard
dogs,
that one.
or speaking gibberish. I've been in some of these events as a kind of an outsider.
You weren't barking. You're saying.
I wasn't barking. I was watching mayhem. That's exactly the kind of thing that was going on in Corinth. That's exactly the kind of thing that Paul says is actually a sign of unspirituality, of immaturity.